sure all of you have had a pet that maybe it wasn't what you expected, or maybe couldn't be trained right for some reason, the attitude wasn't right. Well, you know, it may have not been the pet's fault. It may have been the owner's fault. We're going to talk to Melissa Berryman about that. She has a book called People Training for Good Dogs, and we'll find out what happens with this. Melissa, good to have you with us.
Thanks so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
You're a dog bite consultant, which I find interesting because I don't have ever heard of that before.
Well, as a former animal officer, I investigated a lot of dog bite injuries, and a lot of folks had no idea why a dog would even bite, especially people who had thought that their dog was a great family dog and that the incident came out of the blue, or the person who had been bitten had no idea because they thought they had done nothing to provoke the dog. And certainly we don't want anybody to think they deserve to be bitten, but there are some things that we do that get misinterpreted by dogs.
Yeah, and that's the point of what you were talking about, too, about how training is all very important, those kind of things. And are there certain breeds that are tougher than others?
I don't separate it that way. Instead, you want to look at what makes sense for dogs in the wild for survival. So they're domesticated wolves, and they actually structure their groups in hierarchies, so nobody's equal. So I like to equate that hierarchy with the military, where there's a general all the way down to private. And the general's demeanor and temperament is going to be controlling and bossing and commanding. And then the private's going to not have any power and take all those orders. So regardless of the breed, you're going to look at whether the dog is the general or the private. So you can take a whole bunch of golden retrievers, and they're going to structure themselves in terms of who's on top of who outranks whom.
And that goes for different breeds that might be in the same home as well?
Yes, definitely. We use a lot of stereotyping and generalizations, and if anybody watched the Westminster Dog show, you would think that you could go out and buy behavior. But just like with us, all dogs have different behaviors, and it's reflective of our interaction with them. So you got to put it all into context.
When people are beginning to train dogs, what are some of the definite don'ts?
Definitely, you want to start with a foundational exercise, and I have that in the book called the leader exercise, and that non-confrontationally puts you above the dog in status so that the dog understands that you're worth following, because without proving that position, if you try to get the dog to do something, in some ways they can see that as insubordination. So positioning is really, really important. And then we want to make sure that we understand why a dog would be motivated to do certain things. And so I like people to know that there's two contexts. One is within the group, and within the group of people they have relationships with, they might bite people over status and resource issues. That's what they're concerned about, you know. And then outside of the group, they're concerned about whether somebody, whether it's animal or person, is a foe or prey, or they're in something called fight or flight, where they feel trapped and they think they have to defend themselves.
So that's an important part of that, too. And what about yelling? Is that ever done?
I was just yelling at some dogs a second ago. So here's a really key point, and that is that I have a background with horses as well, and if you're going to learn to ride a horse, you wouldn't call a horse trainer, you call a riding instructor. So we delineate between the learning the skill and training the animal. And with dogs, we don't. We just have dog trainers and dog obedience. I actually call myself a dog handling instructor, and so I'm actually teaching people skills. And when I work with a dog, I'm training it, but it's really difficult to train an animal if you don't have a level of proficiency. So it sets people up for failure. So I combine the two, and I really heavily put emphasis on skill and ability building with families. And now with dogs, I like to do everything that makes sense to them, and they have two tone sets, and one's high pitch and one's low pitch. So low pitch is like a growl, and high pitch is when they pack bond and they reinforce their group. That's why your dog gets all excited and whiny when it gets excited, or when you come home, or you know, something good's happening. So in their society, if somebody steps out of line, they wouldn't talk to them about it and give them a timeout. They would actually tell them emphatically with tone, and that would be a low tone. So yeah, I do like the parameters of high pitch and low pitch to give boundaries to dogs.
So that difference in voice tone is very important, is what you're saying.
It's extremely important, and it's one of your best tools. It's not like a piece of food that you have to have in your pocket or a plastic clicker. You always have your voice, and the voice has two roles. Think of your voice as a radio with two dials. One dial's the low pitch, and that's the growling, okay? And the high pitch on the other dial has three roles, and one is to reward. So anytime a dog does something, at the moment it's doing what I want, I'm going to reward it with a high-pitched tone. And I just say, good. So it's simple as that. It also attracts. So a high pitch will get a dog to come to you. So without even saying come, you can attract them to come right to you like you're fishing and you're reeling them in with your voice. And the other thing that's a benefit for dogs is that the voice can reassure the dog, because they're living in a situation where they're not comfortable. You know, they weren't meant to live in homes or drive in cars. They were meant to be out in the woods. So we can tell them about stuff that's going on, realizing that they don't see very well. So if we tell them everything's okay, that helps them out.
Yeah, but boy, a lot of dogs love to ride in cars, though, it seems like.
They get conditioned to know that something good's happening. They love it. It's just
as opposed to actually the physical part of riding, and maybe just being with their owners. Is that part of it?
Yeah, and they know a lot of times my dogs really are only in a vehicle when I'm taking them for a walk, so they get all excited. But what I like people to know is that if your dog is in the car, they're stuck in the car. You park in a parking lot and go in the store, they're in a fishbowl. So if somebody's walking by that car, they can feel really vulnerable. So that's, again, provoking that safety response of fight or flight. They're stuck, and, of course, they're going to go nuts in the car, some of them, because everybody's different. And people misinterpret that as the dog's protecting the car.
Yeah, but actually they're just being vulnerable. They're scared, really.
Yeah.
And of course, yeah, and I've seen other dogs that just are very calm and just sit there and don't. It just depends, I guess.
Yeah, everybody has a set point for a fight or flight, and you've seen nervous people before. I had a horse that you could drop a bomb next to him and he'd barely flinch, whereas another horse, you know, a leaf goes by and they jump 20 feet. Same thing with people. So there's some individuality. And another issue that I like to bring up to people is that we've been manipulating our own fight or flight response to cope with living with a whole bunch of strangers. So if you get in a crowded elevator, you don't do fight or flight. You just pretend you're by yourself and you ignore everybody. But you can't throw a bunch of dogs into that small amount of space who don't know each other and think they're just going to pretend they're alone. So we want to be aware that the dog has that fight or flight response, and there's different degrees of them, and we can help them out with that, and we can have a handle on that, and that's with good handling instruction and good technique.
The book is called People Training for Good Dogs. I want to give you your website, melissaberryman.com, and thanks for being with us. Good advice for everybody.
I appreciate it. Have a great day.